All right. I was today years old when I realized, when I finally put it together, that genetic determinism runs our entire lives. And I'm going to try to convince you that that is the case. By the end of this video, I think you're going to be just as convinced that our genes really are the source of everything in our lives. And if you had an intelligent enough AI, you could actually predict the trajectory of someone's entire life. It's not even that far off. So, anyway, let's get started. What do our genes define in us, right? There are these traits like your intelligence, your height, your attractiveness, right? How physically attractive you look, your aptitudes at certain things, right? This is well proven, well shown that people have certain aptitudes from a very young age at reading, math, writing, foreign languages, whatever, right? Some people just get it, and some people don't. And I think any teacher would tell you that. You also have temperaments. So people are a certain way even as newborn babies. They might be more irritable or upsettable, or they might be more calm. And these temperaments also tend to carry throughout our lives. Any psychologist will tell you that. Um, and so, how does this get into, real life and jobs and careers and relationships and all this stuff that we care about? Well, I just found it kind of interesting the other day when I was looking at the trajectory of how I've been going so far. And I took an IQ test, and I took some other, personality tests and all that stuff. And I traced it back on where I've ended up statistically in terms of the college I went to, the major I chose, the salary I was making when I graduated from that school. And it was all kind of spooky how it lined up. Despite several choices I made along the way, there were times when I enjoyed school, times when I hated school, times when I was trying very hard, times when, because of life circumstances, I was feeling kind of down and was struggling in school. And yet I ended up in the same place. And interestingly, my brother actually ended up in a very similar place as well. So, yeah, this got me really interested in genetic determinism. And let me tell you this, right? The thing is, the classic cliche is people say that you should, like if you want to achieve your dreams, you got to work hard and you got to outwork everybody else. But what they don't tell you is that if somebody is naturally gifted at something, and we've all seen this, that one kid who, let's say, is very good at math in school, right? They're going to get tons of reward and praise for it. They're going to get, well, reward, I mean that like psychologically. Like people are going to tell them, oh, you're so good at this. And they're going to be impressed. They're going to get a ton of feedback. Versus the one who's struggling, people are first going to try to help them, but people lose their patience and they're like, like, why isn't this kid getting it yet? Like he's so bad at math. Like, I don't want to, you get made fun of. You get told that, people get frustrated with you. Tutors get frustrated. Unfortunately, not people aren't usually that professional about it. And you get held back. And so it's kind of a feedback loop where the person who's good will get encouraged and they'll start to do better. And the person who's bad will get discouraged and they'll start to do worse. And even if everyone's just trying to be nice to them, what feels better, right? Being good at a game and winning it, or being bad at a game and losing it? If you're too bad at a game, you eventually feel the desire to give up. And this is universal. You don't want to waste time and effort. The one thing we can all agree on is no one likes to waste their time and their effort. And so somebody, even if you try to outwork the person who's naturally gifted at math, right? The person who's naturally gifted at math, they can get more success with less studying, less effort. So, if they just apply themselves a little bit, which they'll be encouraged to by everyone around them, they're going to lap you even if you're trying twice as hard. You might as well just move on to something that you're actually good at. And it's crazy how much this effect plays into everything. It's basically like, they call it gene by environment correlations, where if your genes are naturally, this is a psychology term, if your genes are naturally geared towards something, then you're going to seek it out in your environment, and your environment will enrich it. If you're good at reading from a young age, your parents are going to want you to do some reading programs and go get accelerated help and all that stuff. Now, let's get into some more grounded, concrete examples, right? Your job, right? Now, here's the thing. If you were to just say it's about how well or good you are at it, well, that's not necessarily true, because personality does play a role, but not in this kind of hokey sense that a lot of people say. where a lot of people basically say, oh, if you're a good person, then you'll do well in life. People will like you. You'll get a good job. They most importantly apply that to dating. They'll be like, you'll find a good partner because you're a good person. That's kind of baseless. But personality does play a role, I think, but just not in the way that people think. There are certain traits that are well defined in psychology. Like, for example, let's get into this MBTI stuff, right? Are you extroverted or introverted? Are you conscientious? Right? Are you an organized person or are you disorganized? Do you tend to plan ahead or do you tend to, improvise things? These are what actually determine your path. And I'm going to talk about one trait of mine that I've noticed from even a young age, is that I'm very independent. And a lot of times people think that that's a good thing. Oh, like you're independent. I don't think so in most cases. Here's how it works. Independent usually tends to be a bad thing. And by independent, I mean that I usually would do my hobbies by myself. I like to read books, write stories, and even just play video games by myself. I really enjoy doing that kind of stuff. And I had trouble asking for help when I had difficulties in school because I've felt this inherent need to just do everything myself. And it really held me back in certain ways, because this is why I say it's maladaptive. If you don't ask for help, right, that's going to be difficult. And you say, okay, just teach the kid to ask for help. This is true. But it applies on a deeper level than that, right? When you talk about independence, most people who are independent, you're either going to become a leader or an outcast. And what I mean by that is that if you have the courage to go against the grain and make your own choices, people are either going to follow you or they won't. And if you think about evolutionary psychology, it gets even deeper, because the ones who are independent, who become leaders, they actually get to the top of the tribe, the top of the clan, whatever. They get to reproduce a lot. And so it's like that trait will still be self-selecting, but it takes, for every 10 independent-minded people, only one of them will actually succeed, and they'll probably, reproduce 10 times or something. So the trait stays in the gene pool, but you have all these outcasts left behind on the genetic lineage. I know this is getting a bit esoteric, but hear me out here. So versus the people who are more conformist, they just try to fit in. They try to be more average. They're interested in average things, right? While I was at home, reading a book or something, somebody else was out there going out, and they were on the sports team, and they were, making more friends, and they were doing more stuff that'll lead you to more success. They say, okay, Jaden, if you're aware of that, then go join the sports team, right? But I did. It's not like I was, being stupid and not trying to, I'm not saying I'm a failure, but I'm just making a point here. It's not like I was being stupid and not trying to conform and fit in at times when it was an advantage. But the difference is, what do you naturally enjoy? Because you're only, like I said before, it goes back to the example of, the person who's good at it is going to get rewarded for it. They're going to enjoy it. If you're someone who naturally gravitates towards group settings and you need to be around other people, or you prefer it, as opposed to doing your own hobbies, you're just going to naturally fit in with people better. It's not much you can do. If you're somebody who's more independent minded, a little more antisocial, and you try to do that, you're just going to get lapped by these people who already know what they're doing. A great example is religion, right? Is it a coincidence that a lot of religious people tend to date and marry young, and they tend to have stronger friend circles, in my opinion, than other people? No, because a certain type of person is drawn to that lifestyle. And you could say, okay, well, let's say you're somebody who's like, oh, I want to make more friends. I want to, date and marry younger. Because actually, I'm going to get into dating and marriages. It's absolutely fascinating with this. I want to date and marry younger, so I'm going to go become religious, right? Like I said, you're not going to naturally do it as well as the people. You're 20 years old or something, and you just realize this, and the person who's 15 has been doing this naturally. Whenever they get married when they're 22, they already did it. They didn't have to think about it. They just did it. The very fact that I'm even thinking about ideas like this for other people, if you're watching this video, you might be a more minded person like myself. The fact that you're even overthinking this idea just shows that you're not doing it right, And by doing it right, here's what I think. Because here's another layer of genetic determinism, right? You say, okay, Jaden, I believe you that your traits influence your lifestyle, which influence your friends, your dating, your job, everything, right? Even your finances, how you vote, everything can be traced down to your personality, like traits that you were born with, right? Because personality, a lot of it is largely genetic. I might link in the description some studies and stuff in psychology. Modern psychology has been saying that your temperament is what you're born with, even as a newborn baby, they find, and all this stuff. And then combine that with your height, looks, intelligence, all these genetic traits. And you say, okay, fine. Let's say all that's true, Jaden, and going against the grain, like you illustrated, will just lead to you getting negative reinforcement. And so everybody is just kind of guided into their set path. You say, okay, well, what happens if, what about luck and circumstances, right? What if you're born into a rich family? What if you have, what if you get a lucky break sometime and you apply for some random job or something way above your station and you just get it and it works? Well, listen, luck is included in any good model. If you've ever taken economics or psychology, or if you ever looked into that kind of stuff, right? Statistics is king, and it doesn't rule out variance. It just says, okay, here's a margin of error. And what happens with probabilities is they tend to even out over time. So the chances that, let's say you're chasing a dream, right, and you're going to blow up. Let's say you are naturally have a certain skill level at music, but you want to blow up and become the next, viral artist. Well, here's the thing. That's included in the model, but the 1% chance of that happening, evens out over time. So your likely trajectory, the longer that you live, right? Let's say you only make it to the age of 20, then a lot of random events in your life might actually have a big impact, might throw you off. You randomly, one day, a robber steals $10,000 from you, totally changes your financial trajectory. Well, it's going to even out by the time you get into your 20s and 30s. If you're the type of person who tends to save, tends to be responsible, you might start doing better. If you're the type of person who has trouble managing impulse and makes impulsive decisions and risky bets and gambling, right, you might be more likely to end up being there are studies that show that those types of people tend to end up being more poor in the long run. So it's by the time you hit the age of 30, 35, 40, you're going to see the results of genetic determinism is going to hit you like a truck when you look at all of your friends and everybody and where they ended up in life. And you're holy shit, I could have predicted that with a smart enough AI from the day they were born. You know what I'm saying? So let's get back into circumstance though, because, okay, luck evens out because randomness is included in the margin of error of any statistical model. So just look at that. But then you say, okay, what about the circumstances of your birth? Well, who determined the circumstances of your birth? Your parents. And whose genes do you have? Your parents. And how was their life determined? By their genes, by all these traits. So whether or not you were born rich or you were born with any of these circumstances is not luck at all. It's a fundamental part of who you are, right? If your parents were extremely crafty and intelligent and they became rich and you were born rich, that's not a coincidence. That's just what happens. So you carry those same genes, so you're probably going to be just as successful as them. Look at these studies. It's crazy about how much people, depending on what school system they grow up in, they do incredibly well. And it's oh, well, that just shows the influence of the school system. Maybe, or maybe it's the fact that your parents could get you into that school system in the first place. It's just crazy to me. It's the rabbit hole goes extremely deep. And you say, well, how far back does genetic determinism go? All the way back to the old days. If you have old money, your parents were crafty back in the old days, 1700s, 1600s, you could go back however far, back to tribal societies when these traits were in their purest form. Because who got ahead? If everybody's on equal footing, who got ahead? The one who was genetically better. All right. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about, okay, your genes interact with your environment. Yes. So they are determined by your current time. So if you want to explain where you've ended up and see where your trajectory will go or try to predict it, look at some statistics of your current time. For example, these days, right, cost of living, people complain about it a lot. Cost of living has gone up a bit. Income inequality has gone up, all this stuff. So people's financial outcomes are not as good as their parents. That's all taken into account in the model. If you're just like your parents, then you're basically doing about as well as your parents would have done in this time. Same thing with dating, right? There are statistics about how people mostly due to changes in technology and culture and some demographics. There are statistics about how people unfortunately have fewer friends these days on average, fewer romantic partners on average, um, and later. Everything is delayed these days. People start their life milestones later. So if you wanted to be the type of person who, remember I brought up the religious example earlier, if you wanted to be the type of person who gets married young and has a lot of kids young, statistically that's going very against the grain. You'd have to be a very certain type of person, right? You have to be, in my opinion, most likely, right? In most cases, you'd have to be like one of those groups that we see every day. Like we see religious people get married younger. Um, you know, being independent minded, like that trait I mentioned as an example, is probably going to lead you to getting married later. Like it's just the truth. As opposed to if you're somebody who's naturally just fits in and is a conformist, then you're going to be more in line with the average. So if you live in an area where people tend to get married younger and you're not independent minded, then you're probably all set with that. But if you don't and you try to change the trajectory, right? You go out there, you say, okay, I'm going to work extra hard. I'm going to, swipe on dating profiles all day, and I'm going to go out to, like bars and clubs and events and all this whatever stuff, and I'm going to try to meet people. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you're more intentional about it. You're like, I'm going to sign up for all these programs, go to all these places to try to meet my wife at the age of 22 or however old you are. Like, I hate to break it to you, but, you're going against the grain here. And remember the earlier example I said, right? Now, there are some statistics that came out recently with the whole dating example. I'll definitely cite this study where they said that basically 60% of young men in their early 20s are single, and only 30% of women, or something crazy like that. And of those women, right, if you want to find truth, dig deeper into the statistics behind the statistics, dig deeper into the demographic breakdown, right? Of those women, half of them were not interested in dating, and of those men, most of them were. What does that mean? It means the divide's even sharper. So if you're a young man, let's say in your early 20s, and your goal is I want to get married and have kids in my early 20s, and you are not religious because the data is different for religious people, and you are not, whatever other demographic where it's advantageous for, you're working extremely against the grain. You might have to go and ask out 100 women, right? And maybe not even succeed. Whereas the person who was in the right demographic, where it makes more sense, where it happens more often, let's say a traditionalist background, I don't know the exact statistics, but let's say they're from a certain culture where that's valued, right? I don't know, let's say they're Muslim or something, I don't know. And then they go and do that, their odds of success, they might only have to ask out 2 women, and then they finally get it. And they're of course going to do it because they get success. So they're going to be happy with it. So they're going to keep going, and they're going to have a positive outlook on dating. You're going to try to ask out 100 women, fail, and by woman number 30 or something, you're going to be so discouraged, you're just going to want to give up. And so it's crazy to me because it's the exact same scenario I gave. That's why that scenario is so profound about the math student, and the one who does really well keeps going, and the one who doesn't gives up and tries something else. It's so profound because that applies to every single thing in life. So that's the thing. You got to look at the time you're living in. And that's why I'm saying life is genetically determined. Because if your dream was, let's say you're like, I don't know, you're an average person and you're like, I want to get married, buy a house, like stuff that's not even that crazy, at a young age, just based off these statistics, you're kind of cooked. Like you can't do it. There are extreme limitations to what you're allowed to do in life. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. So anyway, yeah, that was basically my example. Like where basically if you're trying, I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's so statistically unlikely that statistically you're most likely to give up. So you're going to try something else. So you're going to say, okay, you're going to cope. You're going to be like, whatever, I'll do it later. Your dream is to get married and have a lot of children or whatever. And that's, some people's dreams, some people think differently on that, whatever. Even your very opinions, by the way, are going to be shaped by your genetics. If you're a more independent-minded person, you might give up on, this traditional American dream. You might be like, wait a second, this isn't working out for me. I'm going to try something else. That's where a lot of, a lot of independent minded people end up there. If you're a more conformist type of person, you might be like, I'm going to do it the way that is within my time period. So I'm just going to wait until I'm like however old, and then I'm going to do it. Because that's what people apparently do these days, right? So either way, whether you accept the truth or not, like whether you accept the circumstances and statistics that guide your trajectory, whether that's financial, let's say you want more money, you try to make more money, but you fail, right? You can't get that higher paying job. You're going to settle for a job that you can actually get, right? Why would you keep trying and burning yourself, trying to get this super competitive, sought after job? Eventually, you're going to give up and say, wait, I need to get realistic. I'm just going to get a job I can actually get. So basically, life has a way of placing you into your exact place within this kind of hierarchy. And I know that this sounds extremely cynical, and in some ways it is, but in some ways it's not. Because here's the thing that you can do with it, right? Most people would say, or not most people, I don't know, but there's a lot of advice on the internet that would say you need to defy the statistics. You need to self-improve. You need to chase your dreams. If your dream is to become a millionaire and to, marry the person of your dreams, then you just need to work harder. But it goes back to the math student example that I said. Let's say you're that math student, right? He's like, I want to be the next Albert Einstein. Like, I want to be like, or the next whatever, like brilliant mathematician. It doesn't matter, because that kid could try as hard as they want at that dream, and they're only 24 hours in a day. What are they going to study 24 hours a day? Meanwhile, the other kid who's naturally gifted at math can study for an hour a day and can get pretty much the same results, because there's also the law of diminishing returns. So the more that you work hard at something, the less, you're going to improve at it over time because of diminishing returns. You have a capped out potential. And so, and even the other thing too, right? Even the growth mindset, I think, because this is a very fixed mindset mentality I'm talking about. Even the growth mindset is kind of a subsidiary of a broader fixed mindset, because if you're the type of person who will learn and adapt and try to change, that's a personality trait. That's genetically determined. People they do studies on resilience, and people who are more resilient actually tend to succeed a little more in life. But guess what? Resilience is a genetic trait, because how you react to your environment, whether you are patient or whether you easily get anxious, these are all genetic traits. So these are all, even your very mindset, your opinions and your ideas are formed by your experiences. And what guides your experiences? How you get treated, right? You respond to stimuli, you get rewarded, or do you get punished for it? And what happens for that? Well, how people treat you is based on some very shallow things, as we know, right? It tends to be based on whether you're good at something, whether, they like you, which a lot of that is even just like whether, if you're, if people find you weird, they're not going to like you, are you normal? Are you weird? Right? If you're weird, you can find other weird people. You can get along with them, but it's so many things, man. I feel like I'm totally, how you're treated is based on your disposition, and your disposition and how you develop is based on your genetics, and how they interact with your environment. You can see with your statistics. And if you want to see where you're going, right, there's a kind of a flaw here. You can't project statistics into the future by just saying, okay, people in their 30s tend to be married and have a house, whatever, so therefore I will be. No, that's not true. The statistics, the studies are a snapshot of right now. If people in their 20s are in this position, right, let's say more likely to be single, more likely to not have as much money, but in their 30s, they're doing better. Well, the times change. In 10 years, the times will be different. So you can only project where society is going to see where you'll end up. You can't actually take where society is now and say, oh, if I was just magically 30 years old right now. No, they had different circumstances, and they didn't have as much student loan debt as kids these days. And they also, tended to get married at younger ages, and they tended to start dating at younger ages, and they tended to start everything at younger ages. I don't know what it is with us these days. We don't do, we just, everything these days is delayed milestones. So that's going to affect our trajectory into the future. But I don't want to leave this off on a sour note or hyper cynical, because The thing is this, most of these types of videos or this types of content would tell you a very like, in my opinion, rather like blue pilled, if you want to call it, like very, you know, trying to sell you a course, basically. They're trying to sell you a book. They're trying to tell you, no, but you're different, kid. You can achieve your dreams. My whole point of this video is I'm telling you, no, you're not different. But the phrase play your hand, the expression you should play your hand that you're dealt is a very salient one, actually, because I don't think most people realize that if you're dealt a hand in poker, right, if you're playing against actual pros, there's actually not that much you can do with it except see how it plays out. Like, it's not like you can try to bluff, sure, but that only works like very rarely against a seasoned professional. You can just play out your hand, know the probabilities, and try your best to accommodate for that. And that's kind of like how it goes. But what you can do at least is make peace with, you know, it's like, rather than chasing what I think is very unproductive, is chasing these ideas of fame and fortune and success, extreme success, outlier success. Why don't you think, why do I want so badly to be an outlier when I could, instead just try to be normal and be happy with that? I'm not saying don't work hard on your dreams. Try to maximize what you have, but don't be so surprised if the outcome doesn't go as you were expecting, because at the end of the day, right, even if you have a dream or a talent, how good you are at that talent will affect how people recognize it. How good you are is largely a factor of, your genetics. Like, do you have a high IQ? Do you have a high emotional intelligence? I don't know, all this kind of stuff that people say it can be cultivated, but I don't know if it can be, because at a young age you see kids, like some of them improve very well, some of them don't, and it's just how it works, man. So it's like, I don't know. I don't even know if I'm going to upload this video. This one's very raw, but I'll leave you on this note, right? My idea on genetic determinism is that from birth, we're all going on a very set path. And you'll have, like, you have this straight line, you have dots around this line as to how people end up, but they're all going to end up on a pretty similar line. And it's kind of interesting to look back on your life and be like, oh, this actually makes exact sense that I ended up where I am because of the trajectory, because of certain traits I have, because even some very shallow ones, because I'm this tall, because I'm this, I have this IQ. Literally, I'm not joking, It's crazy. But at the very least, what you can do is take your hand off the wheel and stop trying to change, like, stop trying to do stuff that people tell you to do that isn't working, right? This was a big empowering one for me. When people try to tell you, oh, you should, aim for, you got to make a higher salary, you got to get a better job than what you got. They say you got to work hard and achieve your dreams. You should redefine your dreams to be more realistic. I'm so serious, man. Like, it's just helpful. Where's the downside? If you're out here, like, again, imagine you're the 22-year-old who's like, I want to be married and have like a bunch of children at the age of 22, just like my grandparents did. Well, guess what? Your dream is so hard to achieve based on the statistics. If you're not like in a certain niche demographic, you should quit. I'm so serious. You should redefine your dream to, what do you actually want? Do you want a sense of stability and community? Is that why you wanted that? Then go chase that in the way that you can actually find it. Maybe you can't be married and have kids at that young age, because I'll be honest with you, nobody wants to do that these days outside of certain niche demographics. Most people want to get a college degree or, something like that, and they want to, work for a few years before they have children. If they even do. A lot of people these days, look at the studies and the statistics. Some people don't even want to have children. The average number of across the world, not just even in the United States, the average number of children people are having is at an all-time low. So, like, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you can never do that, but I'm saying, like, you should be more realistic. You should focus on finding, like, breaking down, and I might talk more about this in another video, but breaking down what you want into more achievable things and then doing that. And it'll be way more rewarding than wasting your time, because why would you go out there, right? That guy goes out there, asks 100 women out, gets completely burned. Everyone makes fun of him, unfortunately, for dating to marry. Everyone does all this stuff. Meanwhile, the one who just decided to just play the hand that they were dealt, sitting back, relaxed, taking it easy, having a good time. They still got what they wanted at maybe like 27 or 30 years old or however old. But they're like, yeah, I didn't really rush for it because I recognized the time that I was in and I recognized the circumstance of my birth. So I just decided to sit back and see how it was going to play out, knowing that most of it actually wasn't under my control. Most of life, whether you get accepted by a job, not very much you can do there. Sure, you can try to interview as best as you can, but if the job has 10 candidates lined up who are all perfect candidates, who are they going to, they're all, they're not perfect, but they're all very smart, reasonable people. Who's the job going to pick? I've seen jobs that have had 55 applicants. I'll never forget that one. 100 applicants, whatever. Like they were running speed interviews, like they were doing all this stuff. I'm like, this is a joke. There's no way I can actually reasonably stand out for this job. It's just a question of what are they looking for right now? And if my resume fits into their little box, then they'll take me. This is how it works. It's a similar thing with a lot of people date by surprisingly shallow characteristics. It's a similar thing. This is how life works. But that's okay, because you can still find meaning in individual interactions. But if you try your best, if you overwork yourself trying to achieve unrealistic standards, while somebody else who's more talented at that just comes in and swoops and takes it from you, you're going to feel resentful and bitter. So a much more productive way to go about your life is to just take one hand off the wheel and say, hey, I'm going to do my best, and let's see whatever you believe in, let's see what life, what, genetic determinism, what God, like whatever you want to call it, let's see what it has to go for me, and let's see where I end up. And maybe someday they'll have, actually, I think we're very close to a level of intelligence with an artificial intelligence that can predict someone's entire life. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, this wasn't exactly a fun one, but this is kind of an essay on why I actually believe in genetic determinism. And I might talk more about this topic because it fascinates me and I can't unsee it. Have a blessed day. Have a great day.